So let's talk about pipelines. So I'm Matt Tesauro, and I think AppSec needs to change. I think we've been doing it not a bad way, but I think we need to do it certainly a better way. And I'm going to walk you through my sort of vision, story, whatever, of how I think that should happen. So let's talk about the AppSec evolution, right? And I want to start talking about trains. It seems kind of weird. We're in an AppSec conference, so I'm talking about trains. There's this whole geeky train thing, so I guess it makes sense. But I was thinking about trains and their impact on the US and US history in particular, and there's actually, I think, the possibility of us having the same sort of alignment in AppSec. Right, so if you think about trains, and when we started actually pushing trains across the US, it radically changed how things happened. Right? This weird West Coast thing that for people in New England was this maybe distant dream and 6 months of travel, suddenly became a possibility, right? Instead of getting in a wagon and going through unbroken ground and getting shot by arrows, maybe by Indians, or starving to death on a mountain range, or whatever happened to you, right? You could get across the country in a week. And for, what was that, $150, which was a lot of money back then, but still, it made it feasible, as opposed to a wagon, 6 months and maybe $1,000 to get you across. All of a sudden, we brought the price down. And all of a sudden, people could travel. And the US kind of opened up after those trains happened, right? And conversely, if you didn't have a train stop in your town probably died, right? There's a whole bunch of towns out west that aren't here anymore because the train didn't stop there. And so they just got bypassed and kind of withered and died. So trains equaled change, right? If you think about it, trains came out, the world radically changed, at least the US world radically changed. And for better or for worse, things changed, right? Things got different, the world moved around it. But the US certainly got a lot smaller, right? This big, huge country that was very, very hard and difficult. And if you went to go from, say, the East Coast to the West Coast, you kind of kissed your relatives goodbye and you probably never saw them again, right? Like, I'm hitting off west and maybe I'll send you a letter if it happens, but otherwise I'm never going to see you again. Suddenly that's not true. And it certainly expanded markets, right? If you're producing something in the East Coast, you can now get it to the West Coast in a week. That's very reasonable, right? And so the cost of going west, the cost of exploration went way down, right? Although those things were exceptionally positive to the US. So let's think about this in terms of DevOps, right? I think DevOps is going to change the way we do IT for better or for worse. It's certainly changing it right now, and I don't know very few companies aren't at least talking about it, thinking about it, considering it. We had a serverless talk by James Wickett yesterday, right? There's big changes are happening. And certainly, if you think about it, one of the things about DevOps, it changed batch sizes, right? If you're doing DevOps CI/CD, you're doing small little changes over time to make things, if nothing else, the scope of problems to be smaller. So all of a sudden, these deployments got smaller. It certainly has expanded markets and more customers, right? You can be a startup with absolutely no IT infrastructure and have a .OI address if you want to be a hipster, right, and start a business. That wasn't possible many years ago when you actually had to go buy iron and put it in a data center, et cetera, right? The cloud and DevOps has changed that, right? And the cost of experimentation, if you're doing DevOps correctly, is very, very low. It's not that hard to try these little experiments. Feature flags, conditional releases, rolling out a bit of software to only a few of the nodes of your horizontally scaling infrastructure, all those things are now possible, right? It radically changes your options and gives you a much better way forward. So I'm hoping at some point we'll see some love between AppSec and DevOps. Because honestly, I think AppSec could take a lot of lessons from DevOps and honestly steal and co-opt them and use them internally to make our lives a lot better. AppSec Pipelines. So this is something that I've been talking about for a while and has sort of evolved over my career, and I think it's finally gotten fairly mature. But the basis of an AppSec pipeline is I like to take the ideas of Agile and CI/CD and DevOps and these other things that are working fairly well for the development world and say, you know what, why don't we steal the best of those and actually use them in how we do AppSec to make our lives a little bit better. So what are the key features of an AppSec pipeline? And by the way, an AppSec pipeline, instead of being a normal build pipeline where your artifact is, say, a deployable bit of software that you're going to shove out on a server somewhere, for an AppSec pipeline, your artifact is really information on the security status of your suite of software. So what's good about pipelines? They're designed for iterative improvement because honestly, I don't think there's any AppSec person in the room who was hired just to build a pipeline. You're probably hired to do AppSec. But if you can spend a little bit of your time making your job quicker, easier, faster, and kind of going meta, you'll actually be much further ahead. And so since you're never really going to be given the 3 weeks to go off and build this thing in its entirety, build it iteratively in slices over time and slowly get better, right? And that's kind of a DevOps way. It certainly provides a reusable path for AppSec activities, and I'll show you a picture of that where things get to be regular and you kind of get an easy button. The nice thing is, too, it provides a very consistent sort of process for your team and your constituency, whoever you're dealing with in the business or your consultancy, your clients, whatever, to talk about where things are at. If you have a staged pipeline and you know where things are, it's very easy to talk about the state of things. It's a one-way flow from left to right with well-defined states. Very heavily depends on automation. It's going to grow organically over time. And ideally, it's going to gracefully interconnect with however your dev teams deal with software flaws, right? Bugs, whatever, Jira tickets, issue tracker, whatever. You want your security issues to be handled in the same way. You don't want to make a different something that the dev teams have to deal with that makes no sense, right? Give them the same way. Now, yes, they're flagged security in Jira, or they've got some kind of type equals security in Jira so you can track them. But really, they should just be handled the same way. Don't chuck a 500-page PDF over the wall to dev team and expect them to actually deal with that with any kind of grace. So here's an example DevOps pipeline. Right? You're starting at the far side. We have some sort of inbound request, right? And you'll need some sort of system to take that in and triage that and understand what inbound requests you have. After that, you're going to go to some kind of orchestration layer that's going to provision and otherwise triage and understand what needs to happen. You'll have a whole bunch of tests that you can run either in parallel or a la carte run them as you need. So a high-risk app maybe gets all your testing capability. A low-risk app only gets a small portion of your testing capability. And then at the end, you have the delivery section, right? This is where you're taking all of those tools output, putting them into a single application vulnerability repository, and then pushing stuff out of there into defect trackers. Out to do reporting and metrics, out to do a GRC tool if you actually got Archer working. Good luck with that. But anyway, right, it's going to flow from left to right and ideally give you a much more sane and normal way to do things. And what's cool about this is things like low business value applications that you honestly just don't have time to deal with. If you have automation in this middle, you can at least send them through the automated part of this sort of pipeline or gauntlet, if you want to call it that, and give them at least the automated touch so you know they're not at least so bad. Right? It's almost like you must be this high to ride the ride, and you can establish that with the pipeline. So what we really want is to get away from the sort of custom-built testing, which I've done millions of web application security assessments, not millions, I've done lots of web application security assessments, right? That are, here's a URL, here's our creds, use your brain and a proxy and whatever to find out what's wrong with that over a week, right? You probably don't have time for that. And honestly, not all applications probably need that in your suite of applications at your business. So what we really need to do is have sort of an a la carte selection where you can pick and match according to the risk profile of that app, the tests that make sense. So what color is your pipeline? So I've been talking about and thinking about pipelines since I worked at Rackspace in 2011. It kind of really came into full fruition when I was at Pearson a couple years after that. And I've seen them sort of iterate and change in different ways. So I wanted to sort of put down an idea of different sort of ways that these things can grow and mature and change. And the other thing is, like, your purpose, your team's purpose, if you're an AppSec team, is really to give your business visibility into the security state of the software that it's producing or buying or interacting with in whatever way, right? That's really your purpose. So if you do this pipeline right, you're going to be able to look at and get a security assessment of more of the software that's in the sort of suite of software for your company. Oh, and my favorite quote ever from Deming, right? Spending time optimizing anything other than the critical resource is an illusion. Deming, by the way, if you don't know, was the guy who went over to Japan after World War II and really revolutionized the manufacturing there. And the 70s, when the little tiny Japanese cars started eating the lunch of the American producers, was somewhat due to the stuff he did in Japan to revolutionize how they did manufacturing. So AppSec, so the critical resource in my contention is AppSec personnel, right? Please raise your hand if you have too many people in your AppSec team. And like once again, for the nth time that I've given this talk, nobody raises their hand, right? Like nobody has enough bodies to solve this problem. So really the focus of an AppSec pipeline is also to make those few people that you have as efficient as possible, right? Automate the things that don't require a human brain. Like getting URLs and creds for an application, monitoring, keeping track of what it's running. Is it a Tomcat or a Java? The meta information around the testing. All that kind of stuff doesn't really take a human brain, right? It just keeps us something to track it. So if you have a vulnerability repository, you can keep all this stuff in. You don't have to track that stuff, right? I come in, I log into the vulnerability repository, there are my creds, there's my URLs, off I go, right? That kind of thing will radically speed up your teams. It will drive up consistency. It will certainly increase your tracking of work in progress, which is fantastic. Anybody who's managed a team has probably had somebody north of them on the food chain come up and say, hey, we got to drop everything. We got this OMG issue with this thing over here. All hands, let's go have at it. Well, as a team manager, you should be able to say, okay, that's great. I'd love to help you there, but by the way, these 4 things we have in flight aren't going to happen. Are you cool with that? And inevitably, what ends up happening is, oh, well, that first one isn't so big. I don't care. Take them off that. The second one, ooh. Well, actually, yeah, the second one we still have to do. The third one, yeah, we still have to do that one. The fourth one, I don't care. Right? Now you can have a reasonable conversation about team allocations with management because you understand what's going on at the time. It will definitely increase flow through the system, and I have some numbers on that in a couple of slides. It will definitely increase visibility and metrics. And if you're doing it right now, you're just dropping issues into the issue tracker that your dev teams use already, and you're not sort of making them have to have an outside external weird process that they're not used to. So the first iteration when we did this was much like the one I showed earlier. And honestly, for me, this was when I was at Pearson. I just wanted to get our own house in order. Like Pearson at the time when I started there had been 8 different companies that got mashed into one big happy company. And there was a centralized CISO group that was managing this huge 40,000 people in that company. There was, well, we never really knew, but somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 apps and about 2,000 to 2,500 developers. So it was a big sprawling mess. And honestly, before I could even think about trying to integrate and talk to and play nice with the other bits of Pearson, we needed to get our house in order. So I wanted to make sure that the AppSec team was as efficient as possible before we moved on. So we did what I kind of call the first generation, kind of an inside-focused AppSec pipeline. And this is not about integrating with other people's build pipelines or any of that. It's all about making sure our team handles its work as efficiently as possible. Right? Then once you have your own house in order, what's the next thing to do? Well, look outside your house, right? Look outside your team's purpose and that which changes it. Now find those teams that are progressive, those dev teams that have actually doing CI/CD or continuous delivery or some kind of automation, and hook into their pipelines, right? Run some tools in their pipelines and then push those back into your own existing pipelines so you can capture that metrics, any kind of issues that flow out of that, right? These can be breaking tests, these can be non-breaking tests, but the point is this activity is already happening. You can kind of shoehorn a couple of your security activities inside of this, and if you interact gracefully, you now have a heightened visibility without too much extra work, right? That other team's pipeline is now doing security checking for you every time they do a build or however often they run their dev pipeline, and done. And then when you are weaponizing Jenkins, there are several things to consider when you're doing this, right? First off, you want to make sure that if you are doing build breaking tests, you absolutely positively cannot ever have false positives. Like you do not want to be the putz who breaks the build for something that isn't true. Because if you want to get yoinked out of that pipeline that the dev team runs any quicker, I can't think of a way to do it, right? So do not put tests with false positives as breaking tests. Now I'm okay if you run tests that may have false positives, that run, gather results, ship them over to your pipeline, and then go green, right? And then a human, right, with the human brain can go and look through those results and see if it's worth actually doing anything about, right? But do not put breaking tests in builds. And then You need to change or think about tests in two sort of different ways, health checks versus scanning. Traditional scanning, right, you take a URL and a scanner and you point it at an app and it runs and it gives you results, right? That's a traditional sort of way of doing things. Hopefully it's in depth, it runs a long time, right? Those are great and those are fine and they have value. But what I like to do, particularly in CI/CD situations, is just do what I call health checks. These are stupid little tests that tell you something about the security properties of that app that don't false positive. Do they have the right security headers? Is there a secure flag on the cookie? What are the SSL settings? These are all things you can automate and run with high accuracy that tell you about the security posture of that app. And you just run them all the time. Run them every day, run them every week, whatever cadence makes sense for you, but run them regularly. And now you have sort of a pulse on the health of that application. Now, if you do end up doing manual testing or some other kind of activity with that app, look at those health checks and don't rerun those tests, right? If yesterday you looked at the SSL settings of that application, there's no reason to go back and manually test that. Cross that off your list of things to manually test. In some places that I've seen the pipeline done, they actually were very progressive and awesome, honestly. They were actually running specific tests for all of the findings that they found in their apps. And they would put those into a Jenkins job that ran regularly and would be red as if it was vulnerable and green once it was fixed. If you get to this place, this is pretty amazing, right? You find 10 issues with an app, you write 10 test cases, you drop them into Jenkins, and now they do a release. And actually for my friend who did this, he actually was able to email the dev team and say, hey, by the way, that last release fixed these 3 bugs. They didn't even know they fixed them, right? He was able to actually tell the dev team, good job, you fixed these bugs proactively because he had these things running in Jenkins, looking at the vulnerabilities that he knew about to see when they got fixed. And then the other interesting thing that comes when you're doing this, and there's no, I can't give you the magic bullet answer, it depends on how things work at where you're working at, is the cadence of these tests, right? If you have really long-running tests and you have really fast-moving dev teams, that's okay. They just can't be breaking. And maybe you have to run those separate of their build pipelines. Right? If you have somebody who's doing a release every day and you have a test that takes 2 days to run, well, fine, run it every 2 days. And guess what? A release may slip out between when you first started scanning and when you get done scanning. But guess what? That team's also fast. If you tell them the next day, you'll have it fixed in the 3rd day and then done. Right? So it's not so bad. One of the things when I first got to Rack and we had some crazy teams doing like 75 deploys a day to production, and you're like, OMG, how do I even test this thing? Because it's always changing out from underneath me. That's all right. We were testing that one time and we found an issue, reached out to the team on IRC and said, hey, found this issue, here's the HTTP that did it, here's why it's bad, et cetera. The team said, okay, cool, thanks. The guy who was testing, he moves on, he keeps testing. A little while later, he gets a ding on IRC. Yo, what's up? It's that same app team that we're testing. Hey, it's fixed, and we pushed a patch to production. We haven't even written the finding up yet, and it's already patched in production. That was kind of when it clicked with me, like this really fast-moving dev teams are actually kind of a security plus if you can work with them in the right way. If you can get them the information quick enough, guess what? Those patches go out quick, and the issues get fixed quick. Oh, another thing that I've been working on for OWASP is doing a pipeline for the OWASP projects, right? And so taking OWASP project information out of GitHub, pull the code to a Jenkins, launch a couple Dockers that have tools that know how to introspect that code. And obviously we'll be using OWASP projects because, hey, I work for OWASP. Take the results of those tools, shove them into Defect Dojo, another OWASP project, shove those into Jira or probably actually the GitHub, which was where most of our projects live. And then if the projects actually have a Slack channel, drop an issue into Slack and let them know, hey, we just ran this scan and we found this issue on your software. You might want to look at it, right? I want to dog food our own tools in a build pipeline. One, to be able to show people, hey, this is the way you can do it. And 2, I think it's just smart. I mean, the first time there's an old project years ago called OWASP Horizon that did Java static analysis. And I got it and I was playing with it. And the first thing I did was download, it was a Java app. I downloaded the source code for it and I ran it against itself. And I actually found an issue and I emailed the project lead. I'm like, hey dude, I found an issue in your software. It's, here's this problem. He's like, how'd you find it? Well, I ran your own tool against it. Like, why not, right? Come on. Oh, and then speaking of OWASP Defect Dojo, I'm slightly biased. I rather like that project. I have a couple PRs in it, so I will admit my bias up front. But I think it's ridiculously useful if you're doing an AppSec pipeline, because it can become the single source of truth for all of your findings. You can push multiple scanner results into Defect Dojo. It'll normalize them and give them one sane sort of data model for those findings. It has a very nice, surprisingly nice, custom report generator. It has metrics and a dashboard. It tracks both infrastructure and application findings. This actually grew out of Rackspace, where when I was working there, we started building this, and it kept going after I left. And they finally open sourced it, and it became OWASP Defect Dojo. It's been around for about 3 years. It's got a whole bunch of community commit. Like, we just had somebody do a PR for the Slack integration and for HipChat integration. So it's starting to get a lot of traction in the industry, and I think it's fantastic if you have nothing to keep track of things. It's beautiful. If nothing else, at Pearson, like I said, we had no clue what apps we had. Well, we just started counting them. Anytime we had an assessment, they went into our vulnerability repository, and now we knew. Like, did we know all of them? No, but the longer that thing runs, the more of them we know, and the more will go over time. Right? You're probably never going to get the 1 year to, well, at Pearson, it would have been at least a year to stop and like flip under all the rugs and look under all the chairs to find all the apps, right? But if we start writing them down and tracking them as we go, we'll at least have a fairly authoritative list of applications. So, evolving, making AppSec work faster. Ah, yes, what went hand in hand with the Continental Railroad? What was the thing that rolled out when the railroad rolled out across the West? Any ideas? How about the Telegraph? Right? That was the thing that went down right along the railroad tracks all across the West. That was a way that not only sped people, but communication, right? Significantly faster communication, right? Now you can sit there and go deet, 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 and a guy across the country can know what you're trying to tell them as long as they do Morse code, right? Not so bad. So how about automation? Oops. How about automation, right? If you're using that to speed up routine tasks, you're going to significantly increase the speed, and it follows the same path so it's consistent. It's probably going to be REST or HTTP, right? So I think the Telegraph, just like went hand in hand with trains, automation and doing API work where you're not, like, I'm sorry about you, but I've logged into my last stupid magic mothership from a vendor ever. I hate them. I don't want to log into them. I want to write code that pulls the data out of them and lets me do with it what I want, right? I'm sick of logging into the 12 different somethings. I want to log in the one thing and have all my stuff there. And REST and API and automation will get me there. And so it's my little plea to you, please. This was a tweet I made, I don't remember when. Well, August of 2015. So when you guys talk to vendors, please ask them to make a sane REST API for their things so we don't have to log into their god-awful web interface. Please, please, please. Please, poke them, bug them, hit them with sticks. Nicely, hit them with sticks. And then thank them for sponsoring LastCon. Because we do need them, they're great people. But I wish they had better APIs. Oh my God, some of the APIs I've dealt with. Another fun thing you can do when you start getting this pipeline done and you have the automation in place, you can do some really cool things with chat ops. And chat ops almost for us at Pearson became like a secondary command line that we used for AppSec. It actually really became super powerful. I honestly thought it was a hipster thing until I started playing with it, and I grew to like it. Here's an example for OWASP right now. Signal Sciences let us donated one of their agents. We run it on www.owasp.org. Oh, this is the, oh, is this Aaron or this is, Yeah, this is a different one. There's somebody poking at owasp.org. But Signal Sciences has an agent. It'll sit on your box, listen to HTTP requests, find out naughty ones and block them. And so here's an example of somebody from, I don't remember where, poking at the OWASP, www.owasp.org, and getting blocked. And I funnel that stuff to a Slack channel on the OWASP Slack. If you want to look at infrastructure-blocked IPs, you can see all the bozos that poke it. It's amazing the number of people who like download Dirbuster and then point it at www.owasp.org. Like, really? Come on, people. Another cool thing we did at Chat Ops at Pearson is we were a 24/7, 365 business with business units on every continent except for Antarctica. So we kind of did all the time zones, and I only live in one. And even across our team, we didn't live in all that many. So we wanted a cheap and easy way for developers to get advice. If it's 3 a.m. where I am, and not 3 a.m. where you are, and you're working, and you get this weird report of cross-site scripting, but you don't really know what to do with it, well, guess what? You can drop into the AppSec channel and ask the AppSec bot for advice on cross-site scripting. We'll give you a little bit of blurb about it, and then drop a link to the wiki page where we actually have much more verbose instructions. But it's a really quick and easy way to hand out advice 24/7, 365. It doesn't feel, asking a bot for advice is a lot different than asking a human for advice. Like, the bot's probably not going to mock you or be snotty. It's just going to answer because it's answering programmatically. So it's kind of a cool thing. Another really cool thing we did at Pearson was we were using Checkmarks at the time for static analysis. And we had written code already to do submissions of jobs into Checkmarks with if we had the GitHub URL. And I'd already written a service that watched for output from Checkmarks and pushed that into our vulnerability repository. Well, we wrote a little bit of code on top of that to botify it. And so you could actually, in the private channel for AppSec team, you could ask the AppSec bot to do a checkmark scan. -A is for the application name. -O is for the business unit. And then you drop the URL for the GitHub repo. And in 10 minutes or so, it would have already set up reoccurring weekly static scans that would automatically be pushed to a vulnerability repository. Done. Right? So now if you have a team that says, I want to do static analysis, they actually want to play ball with you, cool. Chat window, type, boom. Great, I have your results on Friday. Done. And I didn't even spend 10, the bot spent 10 minutes doing it, right? Super cool. Like, great way to sort of roll these programs out quickly and easily. Another way to have fun with this, scaling with Docker. Like, this can be stupid simple tricks, right? Here is us running Nikto. Granted, it's against a local host. It doesn't make sense, really. But as an example, you could just fire up the Kali Docker and run a tool that's on it and get the results, right? This is kind of a first iteration. You're playing around with Docker and tooling. But this is like a stupid simple way to run Nikto consistently, right? The Nikto on the Docker for Kali isn't going to change. You can fire off 10 of those at a time if you have a machine that'll run 10 Dockers, which you probably do. So done, right? You want to parallelize, no problem. This is like the easy way to sort of gateway drug into Dockering for security. Another way to do this, and something that Aaron and I were playing around with, was writing a tool. I do Golang and he does Python, but we're still friends. I don't really care what you write it in, to be honest with you. Like, write it in Perl or Bash or C#. I don't care. But we wrote a little bit of code to launch Dockers for us, right? So if we knew we were going to have a test that, say, was running with the, like, we were able to wire in for a few of the teams into their Selenium tests. We wanted an upstream proxy that was Zap that could at least do some, rough testing of the HTTP code that went through Zap as a proxy. So fine, like, write a little bit of code that runs a Zap and returns its IP. We can then provide that to the QA team doing Selenium and say, here's what you need to set your proxy for, done, right? And we can do one of those, we can do 50 of those. Doesn't matter how many teams are running Selenium, it's just another Docker instantiation, but it's easy. Same thing if you want to run Nikto, right? We can run a scan, push the results up to S3, pull them into our repository tracker later, and done, right? And these things scale. If I want to do 1 or 50 of those, it doesn't matter. It's just more Docker launches, right? It's stinking easy. And I already said most of this. It does effectively scales. The nice thing is if you are doing custom Dockers and that's your thing, you only have to build those once. Like, who's installed security tools and thought that they were well documented and awesome? Oh wait, no hands again. Yeah, I've packaged, one of my things that I've done for years is OSWT, where I've packaged security tools, and my God, we're really horrible at documenting how to do those things. So this is nice. If you go through the pain of magically getting all those Ruby gems together to make that Ruby tool work, you only have to do it once, and then it's in a Docker. And then you can do as many of those as you want, right? You only have to feel the pain once. And so deployment is stupid easy. Docker run blah, and off you go. And then there's two different sort of ways we've thought about doing this, and some of this just depends on how things work at your business and what kind of machines you have access to, and if you're cloud or not cloud, you're on Iron, you're not on Iron, etc. But we've thought about this idea of actually running Docker on the build or the CI/CD server, so like AKA on your Jenkins box, right? Run Docker on your actual Jenkins box and just fire up Docker there and run the tools, right? That certainly works, that's easy, right? Now that's great if you have a kind of a butch instance of, or butch box that your Jenkins is running on and you're not worried about it contending for CPUs with other things, and maybe for political reasons, I've had this happen before, the security team has to run their own Jenkins because we can't touch the Jenkins for the dev teams, well fine, right? Maybe that fits that situation, but maybe you have cloud hosts and you're a very cloudy company and you can just fire off things in cloud provider of your choice. So why not just use Docker Swarm to scale those things out? Instead of actually running them on their build server, have your build server called Docker Swarm to push those things out to whatever your cloud provider is, run the tools there, right? It doesn't really matter. There's no right answer. It kind of depends on what makes sense for your situation. But the idea here is once you get those tools Dockerified and you understand how those Dockers work, it's really easy to automate that. And then it's really easy to scale that automation because it's just another Docker instance with a different IP or whatever, right? Oh, and one thing Aaron was doing was playing around with the new Jenkins pipeline that you can get in Jenkins. I think it's 2.0 if I remember correctly. Right, for now, you can actually tack on as part of a build pipeline security testing, right? And you can have specific security tests in that pipeline built into Jenkins. And then if you really want to have fun and get progressive, Aaron was doing this at the last place he was working at. He actually moved some of his code into GitHub and was actually checking out like GitHub as part of the job that was running in Jenkins. So that now when he had to update that test, he just had to do a git push into GitHub and the Jenkins thing automatically updated, right? Now he has testing his code almost, right? Or pipeline his code. Because now your test lives in GitHub. Every time your test runs in Jenkins, pull that out of GitHub, run the test, push the results in your vulnerability repository and done. You need to update the test, well, it's just a matter of checking out GitHub, making a modification, pushing it back up to GitHub and done. So if you want to construct your own pipeline or experiment, right, what's the, excuse me, what's the way to do it, right? Come down, I love that, come down out of the AppSec trees. Evolution there. Pick a language. I don't care what language you pick. Like I said, I like Go. Doesn't really matter if you like Bash, if you like Perl, if you like Ruby, whatevs. Don't care, just pick a language and write in it. Because you're gonna write a lot of glue code. Now this isn't like uber fancy, you know, large design documents, whiteboard full of arrows kind of software development. This is 30, 40 lines of simple glue code, right? This isn't crazy, crazy coding, but it's super, super useful. Yeah, you don't have to have leet algorithms or argue about the right sort method. Bunch of if, thens, else's, and you're done in almost all of these cases. Most of the stuff I wrote glue code is under 100 lines. It's nothing big. Even the most sophisticated thing I think was maybe 200 or 300. Nothing is huge. So let's talk about some case studies of people who've actually done this now that I've hopefully pre-sold you that this is the right way to go. Company number one, right? They had an AppSec pipeline. They turned each into a self-contained test. They ran those tests in Jenkins every hour, and they would turn green when they were fixed, right? They tied alerts and chat ops to those tests, so they'd actually drop something in the Slack. I don't know if it was Slack or HIP channel. I forget which one they used, but they dropped something in the channel once it got fixed. And now the developer actually gets a notification in their AppSec or their applications channel on HIP chat or Slack or whatever it was when everything gets fixed, boom. And that was 2 FTEs in the security team and 35 apps. They were able to assess 35 apps in this method in 1 year. They also had a pipeline too that I don't really talk about, but they did the whole pipeline thing too. They were using Dojo. This was me at Pearson, at least at the beginning. I left in the middle of this. But in 2014, they had done 44 assessments. In 2015, we did 200. And I have a tilde in front of the 200 because from July, or June, wait, wrong J month, January until March, the beginning of the year, myself and another engineer were kind of meta. And honestly, I didn't do, air quotes, any real security work. I just built out the pipeline. Myself and another guy, Adam, did that. So that's why it was 200, because we weren't really even tracking what we were doing until March. We did lose a couple FTEs during the year, And that was myself and Adam went meta for that 2015. But we were able to go from 44 to 200. And then in 2016, the last time I have numbers for Pearson, they went from 200 assessments to 414. And this is all because we did the pipeline, we did automation, and we removed all those stupid paper cuts and all the non-human thinking things out of people's jobs. So 3 months of spending making people go faster bought us, well, you don't have the year over year? Oh, I don't want off the top of the screen. It's a 9.4 times increase over 2 years. For 3 months' time of 2 engineers to do the automation and get it in place and then start rolling. So it's crazy ROI. It was ridiculously useful. In fact, it almost became problematic because we were producing stuff too fast. Some of our cohorts in the CISO group got angry at us because we were sort of looking better than they were. And I feel sorry for them, but I was happy for me. Oh, yes. I want to finish out the deck with this, a bit of a talk, or a bit of a sideline. Everybody knows Finding Nemo, right? And there's Bruce the shark, right? And if you have kids, you've seen this 432 times, right? But if you remember Bruce said, "I am a nice shark, not a mindless eating machine. If I am to change this image, I must first change myself. Fish are friends, not food," right? That was their mantra with these sharks that were trying to get better about not eating fish. I say we need to change this and have a Bruce mantra for AppSec. I am a nice security professional, not a mindless vulnerability spewing machine. If I am to change this image, I must first change myself. Developers are friends, not fools. And I want to credit Aaron for that. He came up with this, but I absolutely love it, and it's going to be in all of my talks. So please join me with Bruce Sec DevOps and be with Bruce, because I think we need to change. I don't think we make friends by being a-holes. I think we make friends by being empathetic and understanding that developers have a hard job and we have a hard job. And if we're just rational and talk to people like human beings, we'll get a lot more done. And that's it. I kind of finished early on that one. So because we did the pipeline, if you remember that picture where I had the testing as a whole bunch of different things, it could have been any number of testing activities. We did a static analysis and a code review. We did a manual test. We did at that point, at 2014, I think we had app scan, so that would have been an app scan assessment. It could have been any one of those kind of things. I would say at the time there was a big push at Pearson to do the biggest and the scariest apps. So I would say probably roughly a third of those weren't the scary apps, which means they didn't get manual testing. So I'd say about somewhere between a half and 2/3 were manual assessments that included things like, I'm going to do a manual assessment and use burp, but I'm also going to look at the app scan results, and I'm also going to look at the checkmarks results or whatever. So I don't know that we really broke the numbers down in that sort of a way, because one, we weren't doing like traditional reports, where at the end we handed them a report. We just pushed stuff into bug trackers, and then we did roll-up numbers for management. So I don't work at Pearson anymore. I have to go back and look. But I would say roughly 2/3 of those were manual assessments, roughly, like your traditional kind of test. And that's always a problem, and it's not an easy problem. The way we handled it at Pearson was we had 3 different sort of rankings of applications. One were the like high risk, high business value, we really care about them. There was a middle ground of like, well, you're important, but not that important, but you're still important. And then the third one were like, God bless you, we really have no time for you, you're not all that important, I'm sorry. I don't remember what we named them, but that's basically how it worked. So if you were in the top bucket, you got every test we could, and we handheld everything, which means we looked and actually manually filtered out false positives. It was a full, heavy touch kind of engagement. If you're in the middle tier, generally what we would do is run 3 iterations. Sometimes you could do this quicker, sometimes it took more than 3, but I would say 3 on average iterations of a tool run, like a app scan or a checkmarks or whatever. And we did false positive elimination by fiddling with the profile. Oh, this signature always gives us a false profile for this app. Turn it off. Turn this one off. Oh, this one's bogus. Turn it off. We did that about 3 times to where we got a good scan, and then we left it on autopilot. So it wasn't, false positives weren't free by any means, but at least for the top 2 tiers, we either manually filtered them or we ran the first time through a couple of times. The first time we saw them, we ran the scan a couple of times through to filter out almost all of the false positives, if that helps. Yep. Any other question? Going once, going twice. All right, thank you very much.